All right, welcome to Creekside Book by Book for December 1st. It's hard to believe we're already in December, and today is also a palindrome, 12/1/21. So that must be a good sign of the Lord's providence, because I love palindromes. And so today we are going to be walking through Deuteronomy 19 through 21, and we're going to look at some more laws about cities of refuge, what to do if you find a dead body, like in Stand By Me. And anybody seen Stand By Me? All right. Okay, cool. That movie traumatized me as a kid. Going to war and dealing with children and rebellious children. There's a lot of different laws that we're going to be looking at tonight. And so the last third of Deuteronomy really is has a lot of things that kind of feel disjointed. But as we've said before, this is Moses helping shift the people's focus from wilderness wandering to going into the land. And in the land, they will need to set these things up. And so they'll need to have these laws. And so he's trying to prepare them for their future, which is good. And as we read some of these laws, some of them will be like, whoa, that seems archaic. And we should recognize that, again, the Bible was written in a different time with different cultural responses to things. And so we don't have to apologize for some of the things that the Bible says, but we can also recognize that we are not Israel. And so we can't live up to all the things in America that Israel was called to do in their covenant relationship with the Lord. And that's okay. And so sometimes you might read something like, nobody does that. All right, well, we can talk about that if you have a question, like, why don't we do that? Or why do we do this instead of that? So yeah, so let's just jump in to chapter 19. When the Lord your God has destroyed the nations whose land he is giving you, and when you have driven them out and settled in their towns and houses, then set aside for yourself three cities in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess. Determine the distances involved and divide into three parts the land the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, so that a person who kills someone may flee for refuge to one of these cities. This is the rule concerning anyone who kills a person and flees there for safety. Anyone who kills a neighbor unintentionally without malice aforethought, for instance, a man may go into the forest with his neighbor to cut wood, and as he swings his axe to fell a tree, the head may fly off and hit his neighbor and kill him. That man may flee to one of these cities to save his life. Otherwise, the avenger of blood might pursue him in a rage, overtake him if the distance is too great, and kill him, even though he is not deserving of death, since he did it to his neighbor without malice aforethought. This is why I command you to set aside for yourself three cities. If the Lord your God enlarges your territory as he promised on oath to your ancestors and gives you the whole land he promised them, because you carefully follow all these laws I command you today, to love your Lord your God and walk always in obedience to him, then you are to set aside three more cities. Do this so that innocent blood will not be shed in your land, which the Lord your God is giving you as your inheritance, and so that you will not be guilty of bloodshed. But if out of hate someone lies in wait, assaults, and kills a neighbor, and then flees to one of these cities, the killer shall be sent for by the town elders, be brought back from the city, and be handed over to the avenger of blood to die. Show no pity. You must purge from Israel the guilt of shedding innocent blood, so that it may go well with you. Do not move your neighbor's boundary stone set up by your predecessor in the inheritance you receive in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess. Now that last line, verse 14, the inheritance is very important. And the land allotments that will be distributed when we get to the book of Joshua, it's going to be very important that people maintain these ancestral lands. And so moving a boundary stone could create anger, which could create somebody to try to get justice through their own means, which could result in somebody killing somebody. So like, that's like, it seems like verse 14 just kind of out of nowhere here, but I mean, it's an important thing to recognize. Like, Why might somebody want to harm somebody? Because they took what wasn't theirs. And so that may be why that law is here at this point, because afterwards it doesn't really lead into the next passage. So let's talk about these cities of refuge. There's 2.5 tribes that have already established that they're going to stay on the east side of the Jordan River. And so they have established 3 cities of refuge there. And as they're going into the land of Canaan, they're going to need to establish 3 more. And these cities of refuge are a way to ensure that a person who commits what we would call today manslaughter and an accidental, unintentional killing, that they are not executed or killed without a fair trial. And so the person and they give you this case here of like they're cutting wood and the axe flies off of the axe head flies off the handle and kills the neighbor. The person didn't mean to do it. And so they have these 3 cities that are distributed throughout the region of Canaan, so that wherever you are, they're equidistant, so you can get to them quickly. And this is so that like I said, the trial can be conducted, that somebody isn't rashly executed because of just anger. And these kinds of executions, like if somebody kills somebody, the avenger of blood was usually an elder or a judge in the family who would go and track down the person who killed somebody, and they were allowed to take their life. We're going to get into a passage later where that is called lex talionis, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, that kind of thing. And so there were provisions for people to bring about justice, and the family would have been responsible to do that. And so the city of refuge is there to make sure that they don't kill an innocent person. If the trial is prolonged, that person hiding in the city of refuge will be there for the whole investigation. And they can be restored back to their home once things are cleared up. Now, if the person is found to be guilty then of manslaughter, then they would also face that execution. So the way that works is if somebody goes into the city of refuge and they tell the elders of the city, I'm innocent, please let me hide here, and then they find out they're not innocent, then the elders will go and bring them out to the gate and deliver them to the avenger of blood. And it is important that they don't harbor a murderer in their town, because life is in the blood. This is something that has been a consistent theme throughout the book of Deuteronomy. Life is in the blood. And so if somebody takes a life, they are taking something that is precious to God. And so they need to make sure that they do not look away from that kind of defamation of the image of God in somebody by taking their life. And so the community is responsible to make sure that this kind of justice is handled. The Lord also in this, like as Moses is telling them, Moses reminds them that, following God's covenant would mean that your territory will expand. He will continue to bless you. And so if that happens, then continue to add more cities of refuge, so that even as you grow, you're still creating these safe spaces for people to ensure that they have a fair trial in the land. And so this is an interesting process, because it is, we're very quick as humans to cast judgment and to try to say, well, this is what they deserve. But the Lord gives these provisions because he knows us and how quickly we are to lash out in our anger or our grief. This is one more protection to make sure that we don't perpetuate bloodshed in the land. And so how do you find out if somebody is innocent or guilty? Well, you have a trial and you call witnesses. And that's what the next section here says in verse 15. One witness is not enough to convict anyone accused of any crime or offense they may have committed. A matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If a malicious witness takes the stand to accuse someone of a crime, the 2 people involved in the dispute must stand in the presence of the Lord before the priests and the judges who are in office at the time. The judge must make a thorough investigation, and if the witness proves to be a liar, giving false testimony against a fellow Israelite, then do to the false witness as the witness intended to do to the other party. You must purge the evil from among you. The rest of the people will hear of this and be afraid, and never again will such an evil thing be done among you. Show no pity. Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. So in any accusation, you can't just say, Bill stole my stuff, or Bill moved my property line, or Bill killed my brother. There needs to be witnesses of the crime, 2 witnesses minimum. And so they recognize, like, as they're talking about these trials, like, they are standing before God and the representatives of God and the community leaders, the judges. They are standing before these people, and their lies, their deception, their false witness, it is a community offense. And so it is something that the Lord sees as a high value to ensure that the people are telling the truth, that they're not bringing in these kinds of offenses to the community and not allowing for it. And so this is one of the 10 commandments: thou shalt not bear false witness. And so here what the Lord is saying is, like, there is a penalty for perjury if you are telling, if you are a false witness. Whatever was going to happen to that person is going to happen to you. And so if it is if you're a false witness, and it is, this crime would require restitution of goods, then if they find you're the false witness, you have to make that restitution of goods. If it is a capital offense and you are bearing false witness against somebody, then, and they find out that you're the liar, then you are in line for the execution. And so it's a very serious thing to be a false witness. And so these rules, these laws are there to, ensure that the people will not use the courts as a way to manipulate people to get things that they want in an unjust manner. And then also here, this idea of eye for an eye, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. This is lex talionis, and it is intended to be a limitation of retributive justice. It's a limitation of what you can do. So if somebody takes your eye, you can't take both their eyes, and so you can only go to a fair and equitable response. And so that is something that is not unique to the people of Israel. There were examples throughout the region of Mesopotamia and Canaan, ancient Canaanites, giving these kinds of examples. Some places even said, like, put a dollar amount on, not a dollar amount, a monetary value to some of these different injuries. And so, like, the law collection of Eshuna, for example, is a fine of 1 mina of silver for the loss of an eye. So there's those kinds of things as well, that if somebody loses an eye, they can sue for 1 mina. And so again, these laws, the city of refuge, and ensuring that people have a fair trial, the eye for an eye, ensuring that the consequences are equal to the offense. These are limitations to vengeance, helping people not act out in a rash manner to bring more harm to the community, because the Lord desires that the people would be faithful, that they would love the Lord and love their neighbor. And so these laws seem intense, but at the same time, the law helps to safeguard the people from themselves and their own rage and anger. All right, let's look at chapter 20. When you go to a war against your enemies and see horses and chariots and an army greater than yours, do not be afraid of them, because the Lord your God, who brought you up out of Egypt, will be with you. When you are about to go into battle, the priest shall come forward and address the army. He shall say, "Hear, Israel, today you are going into battle against your enemies. Do not be faint-hearted or afraid. Do not panic or be terrified by them, for the Lord your God is the God who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to give you victory." The officers shall say to the army, "Has anyone built a new house and not yet begun to live in it? Let him go home, or he may die in battle, and someone else may begin to live in it. Has anyone planted a vineyard and not begun to enjoy it? Let him go home, or he may die in battle, and someone else enjoy it. Has anyone become pledged to a woman and not married her? Let him go home, or he may die in battle, and someone else marry her." Then the officer shall add, "Is anyone afraid or faint-hearted? Let him go home, so that his fellow soldiers will not become disheartened too. When the officers have finished speaking to the army, they shall appoint commanders over it." And so this specific kind of war is like the holy war that God is calling the people to. That's one of the reasons why the priests are there speaking and blessing the army, is because this is a holy war that God is calling them to. And to do that, they must go be consulting Yahweh. And there's several examples of this kind of war where they need to consult the Lord. In 1 Samuel with Saul, with David, they consulted the Lord, "Should we go up to this battle?" And the Lord said yes. And so the people going into these wars were consecrated. They would go through a cleansing ritual. They would prepare themselves to go into war, and so that the priest would help them make sure that they're doing that. And part of the priest's job as well is to say, like, you can see the army, and there's these great, mighty armies, these other nations that are bigger than you, stronger than you. They have better weapons and technology, but don't be afraid, because God is on your side. And the priests are these representatives for the people of God's presence. And so God is with you, then you have nothing to be afraid of from any nation on earth. And so that's part of the first thing that the priests are supposed to do. Don't be afraid. And then the generals, the leaders, they go and say, "Hey, anybody build a new house or plant a vineyard or recently or about to get married, like, go ahead and go home." Which is weird in our context, because like that's not a law that we allow often for people just to leave. But they send them home so that they can enjoy the life that they have been building. Also sending them home so they're not distracted while they're in the army, because a distracted soldier is a dangerous soldier. And so sending them home is actually one more protection for the people. And then the last one is anybody still afraid? Go ahead and go home. We don't need a faint-hearted soldier, because part of what the Lord is calling them to is not to build big armies, but to trust his presence will lead to the victory. And that's, for a holy war, that's a pretty important thing to say, that this is God's victory, not ours. We sent a bunch of people home. Like, it wasn't our military that made this happen. It was God. And there's a famous example in the book of Judges with Gideon, as he's putting his army together to attack the Midianites. And it gets down to about 300 people. And the Lord's like, "We still got this. Don't worry about it." And so, God is with you. And so you do not need to be afraid. So one of the commentators I read just said that to God, the size of the army wasn't important. The heart of the army was far more important. And that, that's still true. We're not in a holy war situation as a church or even as a country, but like thinking of church movements, it's not just like the big, massive churches that are doing good, big things for God. but small acts of faithfulness where you trust the Lord and say, you're in this, God. I'm going to trust you more than the resources that are available or the amount of people who are on the team. Like, I'm going to just trust you and trust that you can do greater things. And for the people of Israel, these folks, they weren't there when the Lord brought them out of Egypt. This is a new generation. And so they need to remember what God had done. But the way Moses talks about them is like, the Lord brought you out. So while these people weren't necessarily there, they're still part of that work of God of rescuing them from Egypt. One of the things that I kind of breaks my brain a little bit is that for God, time is a very different concept. And there's something that I consider the divine now, where God is present in all of time. And so when he says things to the people of Israel through Moses, like, the Lord delivered you, that is, God is seeing Israel as a whole. It's saying, I rescued them and I rescued you and I'll rescue your descendants. You all are Israel. And that divine now is important because it means like the commands that God gave the people then are the commands for the people of Israel all throughout their history. He doesn't break it up in well, that was just a different time. It's like, no, God lives in the now. And so, yeah, so it's just interesting to think when he says, I delivered you. That's one of the reasons that I think he says that, is just because, like, you are the same to him, people of Israel, whatever generation you are Israel. So, so that's preparation to go into battle. So then in verse 18 or 16, no, 10, these numbers are small and my eyes are old. Number 10 talks about how to go into the attack mode. When you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. If they refuse to make peace and they engage you in battle, lay siege to that city. When the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put to the sword all the men in it. As for the women, the children, the livestock, and everything else in the city, you may take those as plunder for yourselves. And you may use the plunder the Lord your God gives you from your enemies. This is how you are to treat all the cities that are at a distance from you, do not belong to the nations nearby. However, in the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them, the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow all the detestable things they do in worshiping their gods, and you will sin against the Lord your God. When you lay siege to a city for a long time, fighting against it to capture it, do not destroy its trees by putting an axe to them, because you can eat their fruit. Do not cut them down. Are the trees people that you should besiege them? However, you may cut down trees that you know are not fruit trees and use them to build siege works until the city at war with you fails. And so the first step, there's a couple things to note. First of all, these cities that they're supposed to be advancing against are different than the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, and Hivites, and Jebusites. Those are the people who are going to be in what we would call the land of Israel, and the Lord wants them to completely drive those folks out of the land, to eliminate them completely. And it seems brutal, it seems harsh, but the Lord sees these people in these nations as detestable to him for the ways that they worship their gods, which involve the child sacrifice, sexual immorality, and just things that are run contrary to the laws of God and his design for human flourishing. And because of their immorality and their detestable practices, God is saying, I cannot let them continue to abide in the land. They must go. And so the siege message is for the people who are outside of that window of the land of Israel. So if they go to war with a country, if they were to go to war with a city in northern Syria, which is nearby Israel, if they were to go to war with them, their army would advance. They would go to the city and say, you have wronged us in some way. We are on a holy mission from God to go to war with you. Will you accept terms of peace? So it starts with peace. It doesn't start with just, let's just blow them up. And so they start with peace. And if they offer peace, then they bring those folks into service in the nation of Israel. But if they don't, then the Lord says to lay siege to the city and to go to war with them. And soldiers usually were not paid by the military. And so any kind of plunder from the city, from the warfare, that was part of the compensation for soldiers in those days. And so there were some things in the cities that were far away that they were allowed to take. So like cattle and gold and those kinds of things they could take. They could also bring in women and children, incorporate them into their families. We're going to see there's stipulations for marrying women in these situations. But all the men, they were instructed to execute. And again, that's so brutal. But, from this perspective, all of these men were looked at as a potential threat to the people. And so eliminating them was a part of the way to make sure that they were eliminating the ongoing threat. And so even as they're laying siege, the Lord is mindful of what they do. And, they would need to go and find the materials to build the siege works, battering rams, towers that they could go up to the wall and climb, or ladders, those kinds of things. They would need lumber to do that. And the Lord is saying even here, don't cut down fruit trees to do that, because you're going to be there. You can eat that food. And it's just as wise to not cut off one more source of a resource for yourself. Because the siege really does, it's basically to choke the city of resources. So they would dam up rivers. They would, in ancient world, dam up rivers. They would burn farms. They would do all kinds of things to make sure that the people in the city ran out of the resources necessary. And that hopefully that would lead to pursuing terms of peace. And the people of Israel, we see in the life of Hezekiah, and the ministry of Isaiah and Jeremiah, we see them interacting with these siege works against Jerusalem. And so they will be very familiar with siege works later. But all of this is, to giving them clear instruction on what they're supposed to do. If your city's far away, pursue peace. There's things you can plunder, you can take from that. If it is in Canaan, everything needs to be destroyed. And that's going to be a problem when they go into the land, and Achan tries to take some things from one of the cities that they went against, and the Lord brings judgment on Achan's family because they disobeyed God's command to destroy the things in the cities nearby. So let's jump to 21. This is where we're going to start talking about unsolved murder and family laws and that kind of stuff. So one more chapter tonight. If someone is found slain, lying in the field in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess, and it is not known who the killer was, your elders and judges shall go out and measure the distance from the body to the neighboring towns. Then the elders of the town nearest the body shall take a heifer that has never been worked and has never worn a yoke, and lead it down to the valley that has not been plowed or planted, and where there is a flowing stream. There in the valley they are to break the heifer's neck. The Levitical priests shall step forward, for the Lord your God has chosen them to minister and to pronounce blessing in the name of the Lord, and to decide all cases of dispute and assault. Then all the elders of the town nearest the body shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley, and they shall declare, our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done. Accept this atonement for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, Lord. and do not hold your people guilty of the blood of an innocent person. Then the bloodshed will be atoned for, and you will have purged from yourselves the guilt of shedding innocent blood, since you have done what is right in the eyes of the Lord. So this is one of those a situation where a dead body is found, and it is, when it says slain, it is indicating this not a person who died of natural causes. Somehow they know this person was killed. And so, but there's no evidence, there's no witnesses, they don't know who did this, they just have this body. So what do you do? Death, murder in the land is, for the people of Israel, is something that affects the whole community. And so somebody needs to atone for this. And that's why these laws are given. And so instead of just choosing somebody, they go and they measure to the closest town and they say, all right, your town, even though we don't know if anybody in that town committed this crime, your town will be responsible to make sure that we secure atonement. And it is just a geographic decision. And atonement for a life for life is what we are dealing with here. And so they bring a heifer that's never been worked. And, for the people of this time, like, their wealth really was in their livestock. And so a heifer was a significant loss. And so the elders would determine which heifer to bring. They would go out to a valley, and there's all these rules, like a nearby valley that had never been plowed or worked or anything. So it's a heifer that's never been used for labor, a valley that's never been used for labor. And so like it's fertile, it's ready. It's like, these are things that are like giving up their potential essentially. And then there has to be a stream flowing through it, and they kill the heifer. They break its neck. So they don't drain its blood. They don't slaughter it in a traditional sense. They break its neck, again, which is just like brutal. And the priests will need to be there with them, and to, pronounce, essentially this life is a substitute for the person who died, and for the murderer, this heifer is taking the place. And then they wash their hands. The elders wash their hands, saying, Lord, our town did not do this, so please forgive us. And so they're taking on a responsibility that is not theirs because they didn't do it, but they're recognizing that wrong has been committed. And so they're carrying the responsibility for the loss of life. And, even as I'm thinking about this, like, there's so many times in our culture, in our country, where innocent lives are lost, and we don't have a good way to justify, or not to justify, to deal with the grief, on the ramifications of death. And sometimes we don't even really think about murder as something that affects the whole community. We think, I'm praying for the family. But one of the things that I think would be helpful for us in our time is to have a grander understanding of the value of life and the value of the heartache of murder that affects God and affects the people in a community. It affects us. And we have removed ourselves from so much of the grief of murder because it just happens so much. But that's a soapbox, Jason. So maybe step down for a minute. But something to think about. Here they're taking a responsibility that wasn't theirs, and they're grieving over it. And as they wash their hands, one of the things that I've been working on over the last year is this read through of the Gospels. And right now, I am in Pilate's trial with Jesus, and Pilate washes his hands, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood. Like, yes, he is responsible to sentence Jesus to execution, but he's even doing this hand washing, saying, like, this is on you, the religious leaders who are turning against Jesus. So like this, it's just interesting when you see the patterns of scripture kind of show up in different places. And so like that hand washing was something that resonated with me as I was preparing this and preparing the devotional that I've been working on as well. So the so that I talked about corporate guilt. The nation felt responsible for these sins, and we recognizing the corporate nature of Israel, and while America is not Israel, we are still what the wrong that is occurring in our nation should affect us. We should recognize the grief for any loss of life, for any mistreatment of the poor, the marginalized. These are all things that were very important to God for the people of Israel. And maybe we have lost something when we forget that corporate identity piece in the Hebrew scriptures, and how we can carry that into our identity today as followers of Jesus. All right, so let's jump to the next section then, which is marrying a captive woman. And so it seems like it's jumping back and forth here. Like this maybe would have made more sense if it was right after the siege section, but that's not where Moses put it. So verse 10, when you go to war against your enemies and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands and you take captives, if you notice among the captives a beautiful woman and are attracted to her, you may take her as your wife. Bring her into your home and have her shave her head, trim her nails, and put aside the clothes she was wearing when captured. After she has lived in your house and mourned her father and mother for a full month, then you may go to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. If you are not pleased with her, let her go wherever she wishes. You must not sell her or treat her as a slave, since you have dishonored her. And real quick, again, this is a different culture. This is not unusual in this time to, if you capture a city, for people to take foreign women to be their wives. That was not unusual. This is not unique to Israel. But what is unique to Israel is the way they treat these women. And so the, shaving her head, trimming her nails, changing her clothes, all of those things, those are ultimately about identity. And like she is being brought into the covenant people of Israel. And so she needs to change her identity and be willing to submit to, essentially a conversion to covenant with the Lord. But also she's granted time before they're married. She's granted a month to grieve. And it might seem like not very much, but it's the man who's taking this foreign woman can't just take her and rape her. Like there's a process here of preparation and letting her grieve, letting her transform her identity. It does not seem like a lot to us, but it is still pretty revolutionary. And he's supposed to bring her in to his house, care for her this whole time. Part of this month could also be saying like, I will take care of you. I'll provide for you. Let me show you that I can do this. And then they may, after the month, then he may marry her. But then if and it says here, if you are not pleased with her, if there's something where maybe culturally she's not following the Lord and it's like, this isn't working, or she's, just continually arguing and fighting or not changing over her identity, whatever it is that's not pleasing. It's not like she doesn't cook good. That's not what he's talking about here. Then the person needs to just release her, not as a slave, can't sell her, can't make her a slave in his own house. He needs to release her to do whatever she wants. And so when we looked last week about the passages about slaves and household servants, the releasing a servant or a slave, like after 7 years, you would send them out with a blessing. And so there's some of that here, like he would release her to take care of her, like say, you are free, and he would need to do something to make sure that she was okay. Now, fast forward again to the life of Jesus, and Joseph discovers that Mary is pregnant, and Joseph says, the text says that Joseph decided to divorce her quietly. Now that's this, he was not pleased with her. She was pregnant. And so he's like, well, I want to honor her. I'm not going to throw more shame on her, but he's like, I'm going to divorce her quietly. And then the angel came and said, don't do that. This child is from God. And Joseph married Mary and raised Jesus as his own. So, so that's a graceful reading of this, is looking at how, like, you're supposed to take care of this person. You're bringing them into your house, take care of them. So now let's say somebody has 2 wives, which is never a good idea. All throughout Scripture, 2 wives is trouble. But let's say that happens. And chapter 15 says, or verse 15 gets into that. If a man has 2 wives, and he loves one but not the other, and both bear him sons, but the firstborn is the son of the wife he does not love, when he wills his property to his sons, he must not give the rights of the firstborn to the son of the wife he loves, in preference to his actual firstborn, the son of the wife he does not love. He must acknowledge the son of his unloved wife as the firstborn by giving him a double share of all he has. That son is the first sign of his father's strength. The right of the firstborn belongs to him. Now, one is loved, one is unloved. One is a favorite, one is less desired in these 2 wives. Now, this is something that we've already encountered in the biblical narrative, because Jacob had 2 wives and then 2 concubines that were also a part of his raising of children. But his 2 wives, the first wife that he married was Leah, even though he wanted Rachel, because Laban, his father-in-law, tricked him. And so when we get to the life of Joseph, Joseph is Rachel's firstborn son. And as you read the text, Jacob is pouring on a lot of favor on Joseph, and because he was the son of his favorite wife. And so this law is one of those passages that's like, remember Jacob, remember the conflict and the brokenness of that family because of the favoritism that he showed to one of his youngest sons, even though he had older sons who were should have been the ones to receive all of this favor. This is a protection on that. And so the firstborn son had the right of half of the inheritance, and then the rest of the children would have divided up the next half. And so this is a key part of just making sure that inheritance rights were properly aligned based on who was actually born first, not who is the favorite. And then the next section is about a rebellious son. And so thinking about these 2 sons, the firstborn and the rebellious son, there's a lot of reflection on the prodigal son in Luke 15, the lost son. There's questions about inheritance, there's questions about rebellion, and Jesus's message in all of that is like, it's about relationship with the Father. It's kind of the revelation that we should take from these kinds of harmful relationships, broken relationships. But the rebellious son, verse 18. If someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not obey his father and mother and will not listen to them when they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him to the elders at the gate of his town. They shall say to the elders, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his town are to stone him to death. You must purge the evil from among you. All Israel will hear of it and be afraid. So we should all be grateful that our parents did not put this into effect in our lives, because there's possibility that we were all at some point rebellious or stubborn. This law, as you're reading through this, there's really no indication that they ever did this. And so, but the presence of the law may have been something that, was enough to try to keep people on the straight and narrow. And so the parents of the rebellious child would bring them to the elders, the judges of the town, the leaders, and say, you guys, they go to the city gates, which was where the main hub of decisions were being made in the town. And they say, our son is terrible and we need your help. And so they would do, this would be kind of a trial here. And the men of the town would, if he was guilty, had the responsibility to stone him to death, because this kind of rebellion, these kinds of sins, they are defiling the land, they are defiling the people. And so there's a corporate responsibility and stoning is one of those things where this is a corporate responsibility to make sure that the land is purified. And so the town men would do this, but not the parents. And one of the commentators that I read is like, it's important to note that the Lord is, removing the taking of the son's life from the parents. It's not their responsibility. It's the town that needs to be the ones to make the call, essentially, because you may just be mad at your kid, and the town people may say like, well, maybe you just need to cool down a little bit, and so there's a removal of the first offender or offended person from actually doing the executing. But the last sentence in this law here, all Israel will hear of it and be afraid. So if this it did happen, like the word would spread. That town's not messing around. And they would say, like, remember, this is, the rebellious child, like they are potentially on the path to town executing them. And so like the prodigal son, like he comes to his father one day and is like, I want my inheritance. And the father gives it to him and he goes and wastes it all. And the older brother says, like, your son, this son of yours, wasted all of it. He's a drunkard and a glutton, and he's used it on prostitutes. And we don't actually know that that's what he did. This older brother just says he used it on prostitutes. But the father restored him. And so there's a grace in the Bible as well. Like, yeah, the father could have taken the son to the town hall and said, this rebellious son of mine. But the big shift is the son hit rock bottom and repents and comes back to the father. And so as I was reading through that, just reading about the firstborn and reading about the rebellious son, thinking about Jesus' ministry and the grace that he has and restores people to, like, we should be grateful that these laws are here, and grateful that, this is not something that we see happening in our world anymore, because in our culture or in the church, because Jesus makes grace possible. Jesus makes reconciliation possible. And Jesus does this for us. Now, let's say they do end up executing this person, or for this son or any person for execution. That's the last section that we're going to look at today, verse 22. If someone is guilty of a capital offense, someone guilty of a capital offense is put to death and their body is exposed on a pole, you must not leave the body hanging on the pole overnight. Be sure to bury it that same day, because anyone who is hung on a pole is under God's curse. You must not desecrate the land the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. And so even an executed person in the law deserves dignity of a proper burial. And so using the corpse of somebody like as a display that would be out on the town, like at the town gates, on a tree, on a pole, as a way of saying, like, look at this, be afraid. Don't use a dead body to make a point, is one way to read this. Like, if justice has been done, you don't have to rub it in. And, this person, even though they rebelled, even though they were found guilty and were executed, they are still an image bearer of the Lord. And so treat the image of the Lord with dignity. Give them a burial. Don't let the birds eat their flesh. Don't let them just decay in the sun. Bury them. And, that is one of the ways that we show for the people of Israel, saying this is one of the ways we show that we value the land that God has given to us, and we value our inheritance, and we value the image of God in one another. So, one of the things that we see in the New Testament, Paul refers back to this passage saying, cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree, talking about Jesus, how Jesus became the curse of God for us as he was on the cross. Of course, Jesus did not stay out overnight. He was buried the same day. These are things that, Paul is referring back to, like trying to get people's mind thinking about, but even though it's not a direct correlation to Jesus' situation and that exact passage, but, Jesus took the curse that we deserve so that we could walk in the grace that he makes possible. So, any questions on these 3 chapters that we read tonight, Deuteronomy 19 through 21? It's a lot of dead things, but that's in the Bible. So, any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Okay, cool, Carrie. I saw
Oh.
you unmuted yourself, so like, Carrie's got a question.
I held it in. I kept quiet. Back in the times, prison systems, where did lawyers fit in here? Did they even have lawyers?
They had a very different criminal justice system. So they did not have jail the way we do. And the lawyers would have been the elders and the judges of the towns. And so the priests would have been the experts of the law. And so if somebody committed a crime, the person who was the victim of the crime, if it was not a murder, would come and say, like, this person did this, and that the victim would have to make sure that they had the witnesses, and the witnesses were telling the truth to come against the accused, and that both people would make their case, and then the judges and the elders of the town and the priests would render a verdict. So so they didn't have lawyers like we have forever. And there wasn't jail. It was about justice, was about restitution, not retribution. It was in most cases. So where it comes to a capital offense, then it's a higher level of decision. But even then, it's your person in your town killed one person in my town, did not give the people the right to kill the whole town. It was life for life. So, does that answer your question, Carrie?
Kind of. I was just sitting here thinking, because lawyers know how to spin the law pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was like, priests and stuff did not think that way. And with God's law saying right there, you shall not give false testimony, that would have nipped it in the bud right then and there.
Yeah. Well, people still, they go to court, they make oaths to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But they still don't always tell the whole truth. So, but it was a very different law and appreciation of law than what we have now.
Because I was wondering, is our judicial system based kind of off that?
Yeah, there are similarities for sure. Witnesses, like the value of truthful witnesses is a big deal. So there are some similarities, but our system is much more complex when it gets to the actual court and lawyers and spinning of law, because we have a adversarial law system. So it's usually people against people. And so it is, this is not intended to be the same. So
I just know our founding fathers, when they came here and created everything, I would imagine they created our judicial system to a point. So they would have taken all of this information from the Old Testament, the Old Testament, and created our judicial system to kind of similarly format to this.
yeah, there are similarities for sure. How much they stuck with the Old Testament is some. I'm not a lawyer. I can't speak to all that. So, but yeah, there are similarities, but it's still very different because they're also building on thousands of years of European tradition. So, which is just different.
Sure. British system is way different than ours.
Yeah, this is true. Yeah. Stephanie, were you raising your hand? No? Okay. I saw movement in the corner of my eye, and I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss something. So
I'm trying to quiet children so I can pay attention. Sorry.
yeah.
My dogs.
Good luck with that. All right. Any other questions?
My dogs.
Yeah, there's a reason why I like doing this in my office is because my dogs aren't bothering me.
Mine too.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I feel like the way you've been going through this has answered all mine. Just going through chapter by chapter, because on my own, I had a million questions. And so I feel like you've been answering them as you go. So I don't have any. But I just wanted to say hi to Jane because I missed your face so much. And it's so good to see you. And you too, Stephanie. I'm just so happy you guys are here.
Yeah, it is good to have you all here. So I'm glad to hear, Lizzie, that this is helping. One of the challenges with reading the Bible on our own is like we can get lost.
Yeah.
And sometimes we read a section that like by itself might make sense. And then the next section is like, what's happening? I don't understand. Why are these together? Why is this happening? And so reading through larger chunks, I think can sometimes help us see a bigger picture of what's going on as well. So I'm glad this is helping. It's Deuteronomy. I said it at the first week. I love this book so much. I think it is just so interesting. So I'm glad this is helping. So if you haven't gone back to listen to Leviticus yet, I hope that helps too, because Leviticus is crazy.
I went back and I'm trying to catch up on Genesis and doing little chunks at a time because I want to get through where we're at.
All right. Well, don't rush. That's all. I want to just urge you to not rush. So Genesis is also amazing. I just love the Bible. So it's kind of cool. So yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Jeff, I see your comment. Yeah, it's great to have folks joining. When COVID guidance and restrictions are a little easier being in person, I hope to do that as well. Still do an online thing, but being in person would be great also, because then interact a little bit more easily. But yeah. But if there aren't any more questions, then I'll release us to the Wednesday. So yeah, it is good to see you all. And next week, my son has a band concert at this exact time, so we won't be meeting next week. I'm hoping to finish Deuteronomy by the end of the year. So the Wednesday before Christmas Eve and the Wednesday after Christmas, I'm planning on still doing this. But just and then take most of January off and start back up again in February with Joshua. Is kind of what I'm thinking. Just heads up. So, but yeah, so next week, no group. And I will remind you of that next week. So, all right.
Okay.
All right. Well, everyone have a great night, and I'll talk to you later.
God bless you.